Recently, I was speaking with a 22-year-old who had just graduated from UNL, and he was really struggling with what career to go into. That could be really hard, not knowing what you want to do in life. I didn't have the heart to tell him that that'll happen probably 20 more times throughout his life. At one point, he suddenly said to me, "I want to do what you do, but without all the religious stuff." And that really cracked me up. But then I thought, wait, I get what he's saying. There's actually lots of things about church and my job that aren't so religious. They're just good things. Like I get to teach classes and be part of this community of intellection and curiosity and exploring ideas. I love that. I get to take part with the rest of the church in service to the wider community, just helping others, trying to bring more justice to our community. I get to be around beautiful music all week long, like live music, beautiful, help even try to make music and sing together. I get potlucks. I mean, think of all the good things that really aren't so religious necessarily. Yeah, I think the church is as much about trying to lead a good human life as it is we talk a lot about God. It's about what is a flourishing human life. We focus on good things. You know, the ancient philosophers held a distinction to be very important. What's your goal in life? Now, if your goal in life is be happy, that is different than if your goal in life is to live well. You see, they thought if your goal is to be happy, well, that's fine, but actually seeking happiness can be a grinding affair, and it can also lead you into superficial things. But if you're striving to live well, with kindness, with virtues, and seeking deeper things, happiness will find you. I think at church, we are focusing a lot on how to live well. So I got his point. I love it. I want to do what you do, but without all the religious stuff. Well, right now, let me get a little bit religious. We're in Luke chapter 17. This beautiful passage where Jesus heals 10 people. One comes back to give thanks. After the choir sings, JC will offer another reflection on gratitude. We should always think about, do we have enough gratitude in our life? But I want to step back and from 30,000 feet look at this passage and remind you that there's lots of these stories in the New Testament that talk about Jesus' divine power, his amazing power. Much of the gospel is trying to convince you that Jesus is divine. I want to talk about that. Now, we are a community with a wide theological spectrum. And for some of us, to say Jesus is divine just sounds like one of those orthodox doctrines. For some of us, we just think of Jesus as a moral teacher, this great example of ethics. So we follow Jesus and we seek God. I mean, a lot of people here, I think that's wonderful. I love this theological spectrum. It enriches us. And if you think Jesus is a moral teacher and you're seeking God, your life will be well with you. That's wonderful. But I want to tell you why I find it so important to say Jesus is divine. Let me tell you. So remember, my fundamental theological premise comes from John chapter 1, verse 4. 1 John chapter 4. No one has ever seen God, but when we love each other, God abides in us, and God's love is perfected in us, for God is love. Right there. 1 John chapter 4. God is love. That's my theological fundamental. So when I say Jesus is divine, I mean love. When I say Jesus is God, I mean He's this perfect love. And I would never want to reduce the love, and so I love to say Jesus is divine because it's that perfect manifestation of love. I want more love. I want love to be the authority over my life. When I say Jesus is divine, I want to revel in that Jesus is love. And I say Jesus is divine so often so that I can see you rightly. Oh, let me explain. It changes the way I see others when I say Jesus is divine. Let me explain. I believe every person has the divine spark in them. And if I can't even say Jesus is divine, how would I ever recognize the divine within my brothers and sisters? So when I say Jesus is divine, it opens my eyes to see you who you are, that divine spark. And when I say Jesus is divine, it edifies me. Let me explain. You see, God is a really abstract concept. God is such a metaphysical notion, it's beyond my ken. But when I say Jesus is divine, it reminds me that God is Jesus-like. It gives content to my notion of God. I can know when I look at Jesus and see that compassion, that righteousness, that love, that healing, all those attributes are God's attributes. That forgiveness, that mercy. When I say Jesus is divine, it reminds me of our destiny. It helps me take hold of our destiny. Let me explain. Jesus, the incarnation, is the bringing together of the divine and the human. It's the central spiritual symbol of our faith, that the divine and the human can be brought together. So when I say Jesus is divine, I take hold of what is our destiny. We must aim for the highest of things. We are made to be divine. Oh, I love to say it, so let me say it one more time. Jesus is divine.
Jaber Crow was a barber. He was a barber in a small Kentucky town. He was the creation of Wendell Berry. He found himself in the midst of this crisis of identity. Oh, he was a barber, but he realized very quickly that there was more to his vocation. As people entered the shop, he was able to provide a space, a safe space, a space where they could share the stories. He would cut their hair, yes, but as he cut their hair, he found himself engaging them in conversations, at times providing advice. He realized that that chair was a therapeutic space for so many in his town. One day in this river town, the news came in that there will be some heavy rains, and soon the heavy rains became a storm. And soon there was a threat in this river town that a flood might just erase this small town. And so Jaber and many of his community members found themselves at a shelter together. He arrived there, seeing many of his neighbors. There they were in the midst of uncertainty. Many wondered whether their homes would be available to them after this terrible storm. It was a long night, but the next morning, after fitful sleep, Jaber awakens in his cot to the smell of bacon and eggs, fresh brewed coffee. As he opened his eyes, he saw his neighbors who now have become kin to him through this experience. And as he looks around and sees all that is happening around him, and as they begin to get news about what's happened in the rest of the town, Jaber says that for that one moment, he knew that he was safe. he was dry, he was well. No matter what happened with his home or the home of his neighbors, he knew that in that moment that they had one another, and no matter what, they would have each other through the difficulty. And in that moment, he said he was captured by gratitude. Captured. A sense of being stuck in this kind of place, captured, being bound by gratitude, captured like an insect in a spider web, just overwhelmed by gratitude. This is so different from what I grew up with. You know what I'm talking about. I'm sure you did too. I'm sure you grew up like I did, where mom and dad would constantly tell you, say thank you. Someone gave you a gift, say thank you. Grandpa gave you an ice cream cone. Oh, go ahead, JC, say thank you. Don't be rude. And then as we get older, it's still kind of part of the social mores of our culture, right? A little later, when I got married, here we were, newly married, excited to be together, and there was a bunch of thank you notes to fill out. A very inconvenient time for stationary work. Say thank you. And then, even though I hated it myself, I found myself repeating those words with my own children. Say thank you, whether you mean it or not. That's not being captured by gratitude, is it? Today we have one of the great stories in all of Scripture about 10 people who were bound by their disease, a disease that separated them from their community, from their families, from their religious life, a disease that made them pariahs in their communities. And so these folks couldn't even get near to Jesus, and they holler at Jesus for Jesus to do something, and Jesus just sends them to the priest. And as they go, they are made whole again. Their skin disease no longer binding them. They can now be fully restored. But one of them, did you catch that? The foreigner. Now, that's a whole nother sermon, isn't it? You'll have to wait for that one. Returns and is so overwhelmed. See, this guy was captured by gratitude. And he is so overwhelmed that he returns. He runs all the way back to Jesus. And Jesus has all these questions for him about where are the other 9. I too have those questions about the other 9. But this week I got to thinking, so what? So what? Who cares if the other 9 didn't show up? Why can't I just focus on the one that returned? See, this probably came to mind because one of the questions I've been receiving recently about our medical debt initiative, it goes something like this. Pastor Juan Carlos, so how many thank you notes have you received from the folks we've helped? We've helped over 320 households, right? So that is not a bad question. Would it surprise you if I told you that we've received about 10%? 1 out of 10 we've heard from. They captured by gratitude. But then I think about the other 9. See, they too have been released from their burden. They too have been healed from their dis-ease. They too just kept on running and running and running to the priest because they probably couldn't wait to make it home to see their families. They couldn't wait to go to temple again and to go to the synagogue. They too ran and ran to the point that they had just forgotten about Jesus altogether, right? They were just so ready to be back at life as they knew it, whole life, abundant life, good life. And I either will focus my attention on the great gift and the great beauty that has happened in those people's lives, or I can worry about whether the thank you note was sent or not. And sometimes in our lives together, we fail to be captured by gratitude because we're too worried about etiquette. We're too worried about whether someone let us know. That seems so transactional to me. So people of God, today, may you focus on the beauty around you. May you be captured by gratitude. And may you take that encounter and may it be so in your bones that you then are an agent of love and care and reconciliation and healing to all you encounter, whether they send you a thank you note or not. Thanks be to God. Amen.